What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Brave and Faithful podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Radiant Denicio, and today I have another podcaster with me. She's also an Army veteran. She's the host of the Carry On podcast. I have none other than Lindsey Rowland. Lindsey, how you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me on your podcast today.
Well, I appreciate you for taking the time. Before we get started and talking about your podcast and what you guys are doing there, can you just tell our audience a little bit about your service? I mentioned you're an Army veteran. Just tell us a little bit about your service before we get started.
Yeah, sure. So I did 10 years active duty. I went through ROTC, commissioned. Pretty much we went right to Germany. Well, I was commissioned as a transportation officer. That was before it all combined into logistics. And I was stationed in Germany, deployed right away under the surge for like 15 months, came back, went to the career course, and then deployed again. But this time I was out of Fort Drum. And then I was there for a couple of years. I did two company commands, and I was just getting ready to go out the door for my third deployment. And I got picked up as a foreign area officer. So then I went to change in plans. I went to the Defense Language Institute to learn German. So because due to circumstances that were out of my control, I ended up being medically retired out of the Defense Language Institute, which was really disappointing because I wanted to be an Army attaché someday. And I had been waiting like my entire military career to do FAO. So I ended up getting medically retired and then ended up going to Berlin and working at the US Embassy under the State Department. Came back, got my master's. And then now I'm currently like in DC. So it was a great career. I loved being deployed. I loved leading. I loved just the military mentality in general. So I do really miss it.
Did you were you planning on making it like career before you were medically discharged?
Yeah. So I don't know if you're familiar with the FAO program, but the FAOs in their like full bird colonel
Hmm.
ranks will be defense attaches and embassies. And that would have been really exciting because I would have been assigned to Germany or Austria or Luxembourg due to the German language. So that'd have been really excited. So yes, that was the grand plan, and it didn't work out. And I'm making it sound like a lot simpler, but there was a lot. It's been 5 years now, but it definitely put a wrench in my plans for life.
So you said it's been 5 years since you separated from the
Mm-hmm.
Army. Um, so during that 5 years, we were talking off air. You mentioned you were a lobbyist as well, but you're also doing a podcast. How did you transition into being a podcaster and into what you're doing now?
So it kind of all came together at the same time, and it's still coming together. But I had come here and I had done a fellowship in a congressional office for a couple months, and then I got picked up by a lobbying firm to lobby. And lobbying is like consulting. I thought lobbying was like shady and like paybacks and payouts and just kind of like a slum place, but it's actually not the work that I do. And I worked for a lobbyist who did Native American lobbying, but he needed, because there's a lot of veteran Native American bills, and he needed, and I'm not Native American, but I was a veteran. So he brought me on to work on those bills. And then right before COVID, we ended up going our separate ways. And then I was like, then I got picked up by a friend at the time to do a podcast, and that kind of didn't work out. So then I started my own podcast, and because COVID, as you know, gives you a lot of time to think. And then because I had had the lobbying experience and I was already registered and I had the LLC, I was like, well, why don't I just do some lobbying? And so that's kind of where I've been at for like the last year, but I love it. I work for myself. I'm in my office right now, which is also my apartment, which is great. And there's a lot of work to be done on, you could call it lobbying, advocacy, consulting, supporting bills. I mean, a lot of people that do the work that I do don't even register as lobbyists because you don't technically have to
Mm.
unless you're making a certain amount of money. But yeah, in DC is just hot right now, even though we can't officially go to the Capitol. It's not open to constituents yet. And then we had 6 January and we have this whole, political climate right now. DC is just really doing a lot with legislation, and there's just always, it's like the hub of political activity, which is what excites me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misconception about lobbyists, right? And what they do. So like I mean myself included, like for us, can you like just like simplify for us as far as like what's your daily activity, and what do you do as a lobbyist?
Well, so just to kind of clarify the difference here, I would say like what I would think about lobbyists would be like the big contractors that are trying to come into like because the congressman I worked for worked on the Armed Service Committee. So he would have like big time companies come in and lobby him for, buying new tactical gear, new equipment, or new vehicles, or healthcare programs, or so those are like your big time lobbyists that are getting kickbacks. And I don't know that for sure, but that's like your big time lobbying. So
Mm.
because I lobby on our military and veteran issues, there's a lot of bipartisanship, and it's very small time. I'm talking like trying to get co-sponsors on a bill, or trying to get a congressional office to open up a congressional inquiry on a case, like the Teu case, the Marine Corps who was in jail for attempted murder. Like these are just small, like, little cases. So it's not like I'm, this big tech company that's trying to sell the Army on a new Blue Force tracker system that is better than the
Yeah.
current Blue Force tracker. So
It's a lot. You're saying it's a lot more difficult to get some traction as far
I'm
as like
saying that like that's like the big boys. I'm just like little time, like running, like trying to get co-sponsors on the Brandon Act and supporting the legislation that I believe in. And then what's good for me is that I'll have them on my podcast, and then I can use the podcast to kind of advertise the case to staffers, because a lot of them are millennials. They like podcasts. You can kind of get the whole story into 30 minutes. So like we had for the Brandon Act, we had his parents on. We've had Teu's lawyer on. We're working on the Austin Stump case right now. I have a client that wants to do something with the TBI medical. They want a contract with the VA. So there's just all types of there's all types of lobbying slash consulting. And everyone in DC is, like they say, everyone in DC is a consultant. So, but I mean, I don't know. There's a need for it, I think.
yeah, but you're doing a lot of good work for the community, right? And highlighting these cases, and good on you for using the podcast uh, to get as a platform to get that the voices and these cases heard. So appreciate you for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Um, so yeah, just going into the podcast, how long have you been doing this, and is it part of the reason why you started is what you're doing now as in DC?
You mean as far as the podcast goes?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the podcast was originally called Women of War. It was under
Okay.
a different company. When I left that name. So then I started my own, which is Carry On Podcast. So originally I had like a lot of episodes taped for Women of War, like at least 20. And so I had a lot of practice with podcasts. So then when I got to my podcast, I was, I would say I was a little bit more prepared than I had been when I first started. And I'm only on episode 25. It feels like I should be on like episode 100, but yeah, it's still very much in the intimacy phase.
Okay. And how long ago did you start this again?
I think we started because as you and I were talking about, I work with Heroes Media Group, Adam Bird, And he had me spend, I started 1st January of this year, and he had me spend, which is really smart now because I wanted to get started right away, but he had me take a couple months and just really develop my concept and think about what it was I really wanted to do. And
Okay.
although that has changed and it has grown to something different, I think like that 6 months where I took a step back and we like looked at my mission statement and thought about what the podcast was going to represent. I think that those 6 months were really crucial in where we're at right now.
Yeah, you were able to kind of delve deeper into, like you said, your mission and the purpose of the podcast.
Yeah. And what I found out is that I really don't really want to do a woman's all podcast. I don't I like I was looking at my guest list and they've all been men except for like maybe four. And it's not that I don't like women, it's that you women's stories, if you just stick with the same, female veteran story all the time, it can get old. And I like that I was able to encompass everything now, and happy to go back and tell a female veteran story any day. But I think had I kept myself in that box, I think I would have been bored out of my mind. And I think my listeners would have been too. So
So Lindsay, talking about the podcast, you say you just started January 1st this year. Can you just share with our audience, it's maybe somebody that might be interested in starting their own podcasts? What are some of the struggles you had in the beginning, besides what we just talked about earlier?
um that's a really good question. I would say the biggest struggle I had was because I am marketing myself, and I do come from a Republican conservative voice. And that has also made me think about the stories that I run. And a lot of times, instead of, because a lot of times recently, conservative voices aren't necessarily appreciated. And so it has taught me, and Adam has worked with me on this, where to take a story and I don't necessarily need to put my opinion in it. If you ask the right questions and you let the person that you're interviewing tell the story, you're basically giving it to your listeners to make their own decision.
Right.
And people are more apt to like coming to their own conclusions when it's not handed to them. So like for instance, the QAnon shaman story, like I don't support the 6th January insurrection, but I think it's important to talk about the veterans that were involved, because I don't know that calling them all extremists and calling it a day is is accurate. So to be able to talk to the lawyer and find out what his version of the story is, I'm not trying to make you leave the podcast like loving 6th January insurrectionists, but I want you to understand that the media maybe didn't give him a fair shake. And so there are stories like those that I think it has taken me time, and I'm not even close to being, I'd like to get much better at it, but just being able to present a story for what it is and the view of the person that I'm interviewing. And so that my audience can come to their own conclusions. And that can be difficult because I obviously want to put my 2 cents in.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there. Is because you see that a lot now, even with mainstream media, right? Like they're just more willing to share what they want you to, what they believe in, right? And get on their side. So yeah, it is difficult now. Everybody says, "Oh, that's fake news," or "That's not real," or whatever. It's kind of difficult nowadays to tell what is true and what is not.
Very
um,
much so. And I don't know that there is much truth. I think that there's one side and then there's another side. And I
yeah,
think the truth many times in our political arena falls in the middle, but you can't figure out what that is if you don't know what both sides are saying.
yeah, and also like I feel like nowadays you're either on this side, on the left side, or on the right side. There's no in between, and which like it's difficult because we both have to understand each other's viewpoints and kind of just respect each other's views on on different things, but it's not always like that. it's it's either one side or the other most of the time.
Yeah, it's very cut and dry. And I think that has prevented us from meeting halfway, but we'll see what the future holds. It seems that they're still able to get some work done as far as in Congress. So we'll see where we continue on with this conservative witch hunt. I don't know, but
So yeah, Lindsay, you mentioned a couple cases that you highlighted on your podcast. Asked this kind of to all my guests, but what's been the most rewarding for you? Well, like, what's been the most rewarding experience you've had since you started your podcast? Um, yeah.
I would probably say the Corporal Teu case only because I felt, and I think a lot of other nonprofit women veteran groups felt that her story was underreported in the media. The War Horse covered it. And just to give a quick brief back, she has had military sexual trauma or has, and was going through like an episode and basically going through like a downfall, a mental health downfall, breakdown over time, being kind of systematically failed by the Marine Corps and her command, and then drew a knife on her boyfriend and was having like kind of an attack, and so then was put in jail for almost a year for attempted murder.
Mm.
She just got out. I think she pled to like a simple assault or something, but she's getting a bad conduct discharge, which we all know is like, it can be very cutthroat and really affect the person. So yeah, I would say that story was only because after the War Horse piece came out by Thomas Brennan, there wasn't a lot of coverage on it. And I was able, through a good friend of mine, to score an interview with her lawyer, who actually works in DC here on Q Street. And he's with the Federal Practice Group, and, is just a very like popular, well-known lawyer. And so because we did that podcast, that story, I feel like that story was amplified, and it was nice to be able to contribute to just putting that story out there, because it's so powerful and there's so many pieces to it. So I think that was rewarding. And then it had a lot of listens, and I don't always go off of listens, because Heroes Media Group has the website, so they monitor like how many downloads that has or how many listens. So I just monitor the apps, or the, like iTunes and stuff. And I don't even check those. So I don't really know what episodes get high listens, because I want it to be based on like what I want to choose, and not so much to like please the listeners, because if you're passionate about it, the listeners will follow. And so that one, though, Adam was like, we're hitting big on this one. This one's hitting. And I think people really enjoyed the interview. I'll give myself this. It was a solid interview. Eric Montalavo is a stellar lawyer. I met with him last week for lunch. So I would just say being able to contribute a little bit to that story was very rewarding.
So would you say that was your favorite episode of the podcast?
I mean, as far as favorite episode, because that one was so serious. And it's funny because Eric's a lawyer. So we had this like deep conversation about helping military sexual trauma victims, and like what it means to be a rape victim, and just this emotional, like, I'm just seeing this Eric softy. And then we get on the podcast, he turns into lawyer Eric Montalavo. And so I'm like, is this the same? Am I talking to the same person? So I think it was interesting in that respect. I would say my favorite, like funniest podcast was Mr. Albert Watkins, who's the lawyer for the QAnon shaman. He's got a great personality, and he's funny. So that's a good one to check out. Even if you don't support the QAnon shaman, I mean, who does? But like, if you just want to hear the other side of the story, he's very animated. And as a podcast host, you can get some real like boring guests, and you're like, okay, help me out here a little bit. I need like something from you. So,
so Lindsay, what can you give our audience? Like what's actionable step? Like if they want to start their podcast, right? Or if they're thinking about doing a podcast, what would be one actionable step that they can, take right now in pursuit of that?
I would say get a piece of paper out and brainstorm what you're passionate about. what is it that you want to talk about? And I would say put on there, what are your hobbies? Like my hobby is reading the news and politics. So I will get done with work tonight and I'll go read the news for 2 hours and I'll do it in the morning. And like, I don't even think about that as being part of like my job.
Right.
So I picked something. And then what makes you unique? What is unique about you? I'm a combat veteran. I'm a Republican. I live in DC. Like there's, what makes you unique and what do you bring to the table that is something that you can talk about that to make yourself stand out. And then I would say one other thing would be to kind of take a look at other podcasts that are in the realm of what you want to talk about. What are they talking about? Because I found that I was going to do women, veterans, and transition. And I found out that transition is completely overly covered. I mean, in the podcasts that all came out around my time, and I can list them for you because I follow all of them on social media and they're great podcasts. The point is that I didn't want to be another podcast talking about military transition. So I think that's, so then I was like, okay, let's bump up the politics. Let's bump up what I can do because I'm DC located. What can I do on the Hill that someone in Alabama or California can't do? So I think that's a great start. And then, just, you got to think on those things and just brainstorm and then I recommend going with a company. I have friends that started their own podcast and I don't know what you do. They do their own editing. I like being part of Heroes Media Group because there's a platform of other podcasts that are not similar, but we kind of feed off of each other. And then also like Adam Bird, who was able to like help me develop the podcast. And I think that there can be some benefits to going under a production company.
Yeah, shout out to we talked about it before. Had him as a guest before on the podcast. Shout out to Adam Bird of Heroes Media Group.
Adam Bird, yep. We love you, Adam.
So one question with that though, like, do you guys like? So I know he has, like you mentioned, he has several podcasts on there. So do you guys do like cross promotion or anything at all? Like how does that work?
He does, and he's actually got me kind of hooked. He does a Friday show where he goes live and he talks about each podcast for the week, the episode that's out, and then he puts them all on in the comments. And I think it sounds really small, but when you actually like watch it every week, you kind of look forward to it because now I know what my podcast is about, but now I can see what everybody else did for the week. And then, I mean, when I have time, I'll pick one or two of them and I'll listen to them and then write comments on their Facebook page to be like, hey, this is a great, to support them. But I think it's good because then he's able to kind of talk and he gives us all like our turns, to be the star of the week. But he promotes us all. And I think it's just kind of nice. It's the weekly wrap up, kind of like, your last meeting at the end of a Friday work day.
Like a safety brief before the week.
I was going to say that, but then I was like, there isn't a whole lot of safety going on. Yes, it kind of like that. Yeah.
All right. Lindsey, before we go to our second segment of the podcast here, I got one final question for you. What's one thing you want our listeners and our viewers to take away from this episode?
Oh gosh, that's another great question. I mean, I don't mean to sound lame, but like, just don't give up. I have struggled for 5 years since I left the military to find something that excites me, that I smile about and I get excited about. And I'll call somebody about an idea or a podcast I scored. And, but it took me so long to just get that feeling again. So I would say if you are transitioning or if you do want to start your podcast, like, definitely go after it because I would just say keep going. If you would have told me a year ago I would have been doing this and I would have put all these pieces together and all these things that I'm passionate about into kind of one thing, I would have like thought you were just crazy. I wanted to be a foreign service officer. I couldn't pass the test. I was studying for that. I was trying to be a field marshal. Like there's just so many things. I wanted to go back to like federal government. I wanted to do, anything to travel again. And so I would just say, keep going until you find what you're passionate about and then, work at it, because I think that when we leave the military, we lose that spark, or we can, and it may take a while to ignite it again, but like, don't give up on yourself because you deserve to have that feeling and that purpose to find that again if you lost it. I mean, some people come walk right out and go to a contractor job and they're fine, and that's great. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's first off, that's a great message. I don't think that's lame. That's
well,
don't
I feel
give
like
up.
everybody has an inspirational story, and like I'm not like that big of a success. I'm not that
Yeah,
awesome, but I will say I'm happy and I'm doing what I want to be doing. And I think that that in itself is like happiness. So
yeah, I think that's important, right? As long as you're in pursuit of what you're passionate about, and you're enjoying it. It's not. It doesn't feel like it's. Oh, I gotta do this again. It doesn't. If it doesn't feel like work, and as long as you're enjoying it and you're having fun and you're doing what you love, right? I mean, yeah, keep doing it, man. Like, I think one last thing before we go to our second segment, but a lot of people when they go into podcasting, they think, oh, they're gonna make all this money, right? Like podcasting, like there's years. Like you're not gonna be Joe Rogan straight off the bat. You gotta put in some years to get to that level, and it's a lot of hard work. Um, Podcasting and or anything that you want to you want to pursue. Nothing comes easy.
I agree. And yeah, just for the record, I don't make any money. I'm not looking for sponsors because I don't have to censor myself to the sponsorships,
Yeah.
to their demands. So yeah, this is not a moneymaker right now, or like you said, it doesn't happen like that.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Lindsay. So going into our second segment here, this is what I call the Fast Five.
Ooh,
So
you didn't tell me about this. I'm kind of excited. It's like a game show.
it's just 5 questions just to get to know you a little bit. So first question, what's one hobby you enjoy?
How, like, do you have to say it like right away, or
Anything that comes to mind?
reading?
Reading? Okay. If you had to choose, second question, if you had to choose one person to hang out with for one day, who would it be and why?
I would say my grandma. Because I just want to catch up with her and see how she's doing.
Okay. Next question, talking about reading, recommend a book for our audience to read.
Oh gosh. I would say Dan Crenshaw's book, and I can't remember what it's called because I read it about it 6 months ago. But Dan Crenshaw has a book out. It's really good. It kind of talks about like not being a little bitch, and and how we're raising a generation of bitches, and just like man up, and it's good. It's like he does address snowflakes, and I don't like to pick on snowflakes because I think we all have our purpose and um our point in our own generations to make, but he definitely does a good job with it. So Dan Crenshaw.
uh I'm just googling right here. Fortitude, is that what it is?
Yes.
Dang.
Yes.
Okay.
Fortitude.
All
It's
right.
on audio too.
All right. Dan Crenshaw, Fortitude. Make sure you guys get that. All right. So next question. What's your favorite quote and why?
Martin Luther King, in the end, you'll not forget the words of your enemies, but the silence of your friends.
Mm,
Google it real quick. Because I think in the end, you will remember not the words of your enemies, but the silence of your friends.
let's see this. In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but yeah, but the silence of our friends.
Yeah. Best quote.
Oh man, I haven't heard that before. That's a great quote. I think ties very well with your podcast.
It's a very underutilized Martin Luther King
Mm.
quote, I think.
All right, so last question, Lindsay. Where do you see yourself in a year, 5 years, or even 10 years from now?
I mean, I hope to have expanded my lobbying business a little bit. I hope to be still doing the podcast. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm looking for I mean, I obviously want to grow and I want to get better, but I wouldn't say I'm looking for like this like amazing thing to happen. I feel like I'm already like really enjoying what I'm doing. And so I think I don't really know, but I will say that I'm not dreaming like huge or big, or I'm content with
You're enjoying the process right
I'm
now.
enjoying the process for
Yeah,
once, and I'm just
enjoying the
gonna do it.
journey. Yeah.
And I don't, there's I think I've learned after leaving the army that the idea of what success is has changed for me. Whereas it would have been a huge lobbying business doing all this stuff, but now it's kind of like those like personal relationships I make with like the Caserta family or Teu's sister, or those those relationships that have to grow. And I think that those are just meaningful right now. So to me, that's a greater success than cultivating my lobbying firm into something huge at the moment. But things change. So
Awesome, Lindsay. Well, Lindsay, again, I want to thank you for your time, sharing your story, and doing what you're doing now and helping the families, and highlighting these cases on your podcast. Appreciate you for your time. Where can they get in touch with you? How can they contact you?
So you can find us on Heroes Media Group has a website, and I'm under the podcast selection. And then if you just go to any Instagram, Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Lindsey Rowland. You can just find Carry On Podcast on there. And then you can also find us on most of the podcast forums. There is another podcast, Carry On like Luggage, but they have not put up a podcast in a couple of years. So don't get confused.
Don't get confused
With the luggage one, because I'm
Yeah.
sure that those are some really, really good episodes. I need to tune in. I don't know. But yes, if you would like to reach out to me though, you're interested in, your listeners are interested in like some lobbying efforts or have advocacy cases, my email is podcastcarryon@gmail.com.
All right. So podcastcarryon@gmail.com. Again, Lindsey Rowland. Make sure you guys reach out to her on social media and subscribe to the podcast, Carry On Podcast, not the Carry On Luggage podcast.
Although you may be up for some new luggage because we're all back to traveling again. So
There you go. It all comes together in circle.
yeah, right.
Lindsay, again, I appreciate you for your time and hope to hear from you soon.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
All right. Take care.